difficult to find any similarity to wilderness in the Metroplex, but one exception is Arlington's River Legacy Park. I'm OK Carter with Bob Pruitt. This is another local history Arlington time capsule. Yes, River Legacy is a park, but it's also part of the region's history.
First, a bit of backstory. What we've got here is a 1,300-acre park, a mix of hardwood forest along the Trinity River bottoms, along wetlands and prairie, with a river running through it all. Bird watchers have recorded seeing more than 190 species, and it's a refuge for native plants and more.
Yep, 400 species of wildlife, including bobcats, raccoons, coyotes, possums, squirrels, the occasional feral pig, 28 kinds of trees, 8 miles of paved trail, 10 miles of bike path, with a river course running right through it all. Once upon a time, there was a plan to make a giant canal of the Trinity, which would have made Arlington a seaport city, navigable to the Gulf of Mexico. That didn't happen, but we'll tell that history another day.
The park started back in 1990 with a gift of 200 acres from descendants of the Gibbons family, Berta Rose May and Margaret Rose May. The Gibbons and their descendants once had a 2-square-mile plantation right here in the bottomlands. The park has been growing ever since. The big picture plan is for River Legacy to eventually be a part of a 75-mile greenbelt wandering through the Fort Worth-Dallas Metroplex.
That's all good, but we're about history, so let's get to it. River Legacy is chock full of fascinating history mixed with an urban myth or two, or if not myth, perhaps exaggeration. We'll get to those later, but here's a hint. They involve a hanging tree and a catastrophic bridge accident.
Ooh. It might take a while if you decide to bike, hike, or skate the many miles of the paved linear paths at River Legacy Park in Arlington. But sooner or later, you'll arrive right here.
Okay, that will mean it's time to take a break because you've arrived at 3 significant Texas historic markers. They're all side by side in the north section of the park near a pedestrian walk bridge across the Trinity River, right by, or I should say, right above the park's canoe livery. First, let's talk about those 3 markers.
The Sloan Journey Expedition of 1838. Texas was still a republic back in those days, and some 96 miles away from this spot in the spring of that year, a bunch of Indians decided to steal a bunch of horses from the area of what is now Bonham, Texas, in Fannin County near Fort English. The book Indian Depredation says this occurred while quite a bit of drinking and maybe poker playing was taking place. A slip of alertness took place as well, allowing Indians to easily steal the horses. A couple of Texas Rangers took umbrage at this, particularly Captain Robert Sloan, because the Indians had swiped his charger horse, his battle horse. Sloan and another Rangers captain, Nathaniel Journey, swiftly organized a 90-man posse to recover those horses and punish a few Indians. They chased them all over northeast Texas, no doubt running across all kinds of Indian travel trails in the process. In 3 days, they arrived right about here at the Trinity River, at the edge of the eastern cross timber, deciding, maybe correctly and maybe not, that these be the guilty Indians. They attacked a little village, killing several Indians and leaving with a few horses, though not as many as they had lost. Then they left. Though this little skirmish was not particularly significant otherwise, it's important for 2 reasons. First, it's really the first significant military foray into this region, which contained one of the most populous Native American populations in Texas. Second, one member of that expedition is Jonathan Byrd. 3 years later, Byrd will be asked to open a fort in this region. Not particularly wisely, but he decides to do so just downstream from here. Why is this decision unwise? For one thing, thanks to the Sloan Journey expedition, there are now plenty of hostile Indians. Murderously hostile Indians. For another thing, this is a floodplain, which means it is, surprise, surprise, subject to flooding. Which brings us to the next marker, Byrd's Fort.
This part of Texas was a dangerous wilderness through the first half of the 1800s. In 1841, General Edward Tarrant, yes, the namesake for Tarrant County, authorized Jonathan Byrd, one of the members of the Sloan Journey expedition, remember, to attempt the first settlement here, building a smallish bird's fort just downriver from where I'm standing now on a small oxbow lake. Surprise, surprise, they ran into some serious issues. First, there were those unhappy Indians. Mix that with bad weather, food supply issues, and the fact that this whole area is in a terrific floodplain. There were multiple attempts to settle the fort, but eventually Bird's Fort failed. Some of the settlers fashioned rafts and floated downriver to another new town called Dallas. I figure this technically made them Arlington's first commuters. Failure or not, Bird's Fort would not be the last attempt for Anglo settlement in the region. The Metroplex now has a population more than 25 states. It all started with this little failed Bird's Fort. Now, what about that third marker?
Sure enough, this Jesse Chisholm is the same guy who created the famed Chisholm Trail cattle route through Texas and Oklahoma all the way to Dodge City, Kansas. But that trail is actually 20 miles west of here, so why the marker? Well, born in 1805 with a Cherokee mother and a Scottish father, Chisholm grew up with the Cherokees, quickly discovering two major talents. He was a gifted trader, maybe a Scottish trait, you think, but an even more talented linguist. He spoke several tribal languages and Spanish. He was so good at this that he became an interpreter for the Republic of Texas in their negotiations with Native Americans, including talks for the Treaty of Bird's Fort, which took place right here in what is now Arlington. It was this treaty that ended much of the hostilities in the area and made settlement possible. That's why this marker is here. After the treaty, Jesse developed a trade route that included things like best places to ford creeks and rivers. Cattle drovers started using it to take their beef to market. Not surprisingly, they called it the Chisholm Trail. Good old Jesse Chisholm, one talented guy. By the way, he was so old by the time the trail became famous that he didn't get to do much in the way of cattle drives along it. In river legacy, Sloan Journey, Bird's Fort, Jesse Chisholm qualify as modern history, but some of the park's history goes much further back.
You can't do projects as big as this park or undertake giant things like installing water or sewer lines or cell phone towers without a bit of anthropological investigation to see what turns up.
More than one dig has been undertaken in the park, as well as on the nearby waterways feeding it. Evidence of human habitation along the waterways has been carbon dated as far back as 9,000 years. They found shards of pottery, as well as arrow and spear points, animal bones, and other items. Though waterways like Village Creek feeding into here once housed numerous Native American villages, signs of permanent human habitation along the Trinity River itself are rare. Tell us, Carter, why?
It's a floodplain, Bob. People who were here before the USA might hunt and camp along the river, but sooner or later, probably sooner than later, they'd be underwater. The river is tamer today because of so much flood mitigation, because several lakes now dam runoff. Lake Bridgeport, Eagle Mountain Lake, Lake Worth, Lake Weatherford, even Lake Arlington and other reservoirs all stop water that would have once flowed right through here. Big floods along the Trinity here are much rarer now, but still happen. In fact, the park's amenities are built with the eventuality of flooding in mind.
Correctamundo. But to me, the most interesting bit of history around river legacy is more anthropological. Some 60 to 90 million years ago during the Cretaceous era, this was the edge of a shallow oceanic sea, and right after the age of the big dinosaurs. So dig anywhere around here and you'll find sediment from that era, as well as fossil remains of things like shark teeth and marine shells. During that time, this area was more like the Florida Everglades, mixing ocean and freshwater flow.
A dig not far from here, in fact, that started with UTA students in 2003, uncovered an important deposit of fossilized bones. This includes giant crocodiles of a species just discovered. This was the now world-famous Arlington Archosaur dig right on the edge of what is now the floodplain. What they discovered was important enough to be featured in National Geographic magazine and picked up across the nation on TV shows. Several new species were discovered. That collection of fossils is at the Perot Museum in Dallas. Check it out sometime.
Carter, shall we wrap this up with those urban legends we mentioned earlier that are a part of this park? One of them is called the Legend of Hell's Gate. The other is a reference to what is typically called the Screaming Bridge.
Okay, both of those are popular YouTube topics with varying degrees of accuracy. Hell's Gate is supposed to be a fence gate near the river through which Union spies were marched during the Civil War to be hanged. Very dramatic idea, the gate to hell itself. The trouble is, we're talking 1865, no fences back then, no gates in this area back then. Also, at that time, this was all still dangerous Indian territory, plus the nearest community, Johnson Station, was 10 miles away. So let's call Hell's Gate a myth, probably confused with the real hanging tree at Randall Mill a few miles upstream. I'll let you tell the Screaming Bridge story, Bob.
Well, the name is unfortunate, but the story does contain an element of truth. On the night of February the 4th, 1961, a car filled with 6 Arlington teenage girls plunged off a burned out wooden bridge where then Arlington Bedford Road, now Greenbelt Road, approached the railroad tracks in far north Arlington. Evidently, a bridge out sign had been removed by vandals. The bridge has long since been replaced, but lots of YouTubers mistakenly think it's an old abandoned railroad spur bridge just downriver. It isn't. But the accident does remain as one of the most tragic events in Arlington's history.
That's our historic tour. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention River Legacy Living Science Center in the park, which offers interactive exhibits, aquariums, terrariums, native animals, environmental education programs, a gift shop, tours of nature trails, and lots of classes for kiddos.
Nature schools, after-school programs, homeschooling programs, wilderness outreach, and more. We'll give you a link to all of that in our closing credits. That does it for us. Thanks for watching another Arlington Time Capsule. So long.
So long.